having done that exercise. And then thirdly, and perhaps most practically, how does one go about it? And so one of the things that we need to take into account is the issue of what predicts success and failure at work. And what we have here is a list of things that have been demonstrated to be highly effective predictors of success at work. They're at the top, and at the bottom what we have is predictors of success at work which have been found not to be so successful. So this diagram gives you a range of information that's been derived from an extremely wide range of research over the course of literally decades. And so what it does is that the model of this research is that people have been assessed on a range of different characteristics before they've been hired, and then subsequently, let's say 1 or 2 years down the track, you get a success measure for those people as employees. And those success measures could be measures of things like how productive they are. So if they're in something that's quantifiable like a sales role, do they actually sell stuff? They can also be qualitative measures of success, and very commonly what people use for those measures of success are things like supervisor ratings. More recently, this kind of research has also involved measures of failure. And so measures of failures are things like, did this person steal things? Did this person undertake other forms of what you might call counterproductive work behaviours? Did this person do bad things to clients or colleagues or whatever? Did they take sick days when they're not really sick? So the league ladder of recruitment predictiveness is a measure of things that prove to predict accurately success at work and failure at work. Now, the way that this works is that these numbers here are correlation coefficients, otherwise known as validities. And what this is showing you is the correlation between each of these characteristics as they've been measured and whether the person succeeded or failed at work subsequently. And so the things that have got the big numbers here, the big correlation coefficients, what that means is that they are accurate measures of success and failure at work, and the ones down the bottom are inaccurate measures of success and failure at work. And we find this very simple summary of research into success and failure measures to be a really good way of kind of describing what the universe of job accuracy prediction is. So what you'll see is down the bottom, age is very close to 0, and what that means is that there's almost no correlation between age and success and failure at work. What that says is that if you want to predict whether somebody's going to succeed or fail at work, then don't use age. It's a bad predictor. You also see graphology, which is about handwriting analysis. Perhaps not surprisingly, that's a very weak predictor of success at work. So handwriting analysts don't tend to be good at betting on whether people are going to succeed or fail at work. Some people are surprised to see years of education so low because people assume that educated people are better at their work than people who are uneducated. In fact, the evidence is that the relationship is very weak indeed. People's interests, so whether they happen to be into macrame or barracking for the Essendon Football Club, very weak predictor of success and failure at work. Years of job experience is a very weak predictor of success and failure at work. And what surprises people sometimes, reference checks are extremely weak predictors of success and failure at work. And in fact, what we have here on references, you see that 0.26, that's not a percentage, but it can be easily converted into a percentage. And the way that you do that is that you just multiply 0.26 by itself, you square it, and what that gives you is 0.07. And what that says, you can then regard that as a percentage. And what it says is that reference checks are about 7% accurate in predicting success and failure at work. Now, so those are the things that are in effect the laggards of the prediction at work component. Now, at the top, what you've got is the things that prove to be good predictors of success and failure at work. And so things like cognitive ability and integrity testing prove to be good predictors of success and failure at work. Structured interviews at their best in combination with cognitive ability testing can be very good predictors of success and failure at work. Cognitive ability and work sample testing can be good predictors of success, failure and failure at work. Work sample tests are good in their own right. Cognitive ability is good in its own right. Structured interviews, and in this program or in this hour that we've got together, I don't have really the time to go into how structured interviews, what form of structuring causes them to get to 0.51 from 0.35. I do deal with that in another program, but basically good interviews predict 0.51, which means about 25% accuracy. The interviews that most people do predict with 0.35, which is about 12% accuracy or so. So your average interview is a pretty inaccurate kind of a measure. So let's talk about the components that can predict success and failure at work. And success and failure at work, I guess, if we're talking about work in a general sense, I believe that people hire people in order to achieve outcomes. If you look at job descriptions, most job descriptions are lists of tasks, and I kind of understand why that has happened. But I don't know about you, but I don't hire people to do tasks. I hire people to achieve outcomes, and those outcomes could be the satisfaction of the stakeholders. It could be achievement in terms of getting a certain amount of work produced. It could be outcomes such as quality of work that the person produces. It could be to do with the level of creativity and how that then results in new solutions. So outcomes is what it's all about. Turns out that the things that cause people to be able to achieve these outcomes fit into the general categories of nature and nurture. And a guy by the name of Francis Galton in the late 1800s, who was actually a nephew of Charles Darwin, came up with the phrase nature, nurture. And it turns out that there's a number of characteristics here which are highly genetically determined. So a person's intelligence is a good predictor of a person's success and failure at work. You saw back on the league ladder a correlation of 0.51 with this, and that correlation of 0.51, cognitive ability, as it's called in that table, we're talking about intelligence. Integrity, the characteristic of being trustworthy, honest, and high integrity, that's a characteristic which, I guess, surprisingly to some people, is a heavily genetically determined characteristic. Personality, people's personalities vary, and that certainly has a big impact on their ability to succeed and fail at work. And that is something that's a big driver of, it's something that's very heavily genetically determined as well. And then skills, things that people acquire in the course of their life. Nurture, so these are things that aren't genetically determined, they're things that we pick up in the course of our lives. Our skills, our experience and qualifications, and style, attitudes, and values are also predictors of success and failure at work. Predictors of the quality and quantity of work and the quality and quantity of relationships at work. So just to look at the things that are largely nature, things that are largely inherited, if you like, they're things like cognitive ability, as we mentioned. Now, cognitive ability matters in terms of productivity at work because it gives you four things. The first thing it gives you is speed. In other words, people who have high IQs tend to get through their work more quickly than people with low IQs. This has been demonstrated for decades, and it's a very powerful relationship. Power, we're talking about not political power here, but problem-solving power. So people with high degrees of problem-solving power often have high IQs. People with high IQs are more trainable. In other words, they can learn things more quickly and they tend to retain them more deeply. And also you see that there's a relationship between cognitive ability and counterproductive work behaviours. This is why when people psych test to predict whether people are likely to succeed or fail at work, then you will find cognitive ability being factored into that equation the vast majority of time, because speed, power, trainability are all good things to have, and less counterproductive work behaviours, well, that's a prediction of failure. Counterproductive work behaviours includes all of the things like bullying, harassment, but also includes things like breaking rules, taking sick days when you're not really sick, ignoring occupational health and safety policies, that kind of stuff. Now, if we go to the forms of cognitive ability that are often used, they are things like verbal reasoning, the ability to understand and use words fluently, numerical reasoning, which is the capacity to use numbers effectively, and abstract reasoning. Abstract reasoning is the ability to see implications, and abstract reasoning turns out to be a very important thing. I think historically we've underestimated the value of abstract reasoning. Abstract reasoning is a great predictor of people's ability to understand the impact of their actions, and quite often we've found in our coaching practice when people have had very low levels of abstract reasoning, it's resulted in them having difficult and dysfunctional relationships with other people. So abstract reasoning is important, and in fact there is some indication that abstract reasoning can be a kind of a proxy for emotional intelligence, because people who have higher abstract reasoning seem to be better at picking up the emotions of other people and relating to them. Talking about personality, here is a thing called the Hexaco model of personality. Personality, we're going back to IQ or cognitive ability for a moment. Cognitive ability appears to be between 70 and 80% genetically determined. Personality, there are arguments about how genetically determined. The recent research seems to suggest about 2/3 genetically determined. And the Hexaco model of personality, which was derived in 2006, 2005, 2007 by two gentlemen by the name of Kibyam Lee and Mike Ashton from Canada, who undertook what may well be the biggest study of personality in recent history. They identified that personality has 6 key characteristics to it. And the key characteristics that they discovered: honesty, humility. Now you'll see that honesty, humility has an asterisk, and the reason it has an asterisk is because we're going to say that honesty, humility is an important characteristic irrespective of what job you do. So it doesn't matter what sort of job you do, it turns out that people who are higher in honesty, humility are better employees than people who are low in honesty, humility. Now, this is an important breakthrough, because previous models of personality, in fact, did not even deal with this issue. It hadn't been discovered, but it turns out, amongst other things, to be a predictor of whether people are likely to go to jail. People who are low in honesty, humility go to jail more often than people who are high in honesty, humility. And I guess the other thing that we would say about honesty, humility is that it turns out to be a good predictor of a range of other practical things, like the quality of your relationships at work, like, for instance, your likelihood of undertaking counterproductive work behaviours, and the characteristic of fairness that you see, which is an honesty, humility characteristic here, turns out to be a very good predictor of counterproductive work behaviours, both directed against the person and directed against the organisation. So that's the H in Hexaco. The second is a thing called emotionality. And emotionality is the degree to which people are emotionally stable or unstable. So you see things like fearfulness, anxiety, dependence, sentimentality. And for many jobs, being highly emotionally unstable is a bad thing. Clearly, if you're in a leadership role, people prefer to report to people who are emotionally stable and not kind of flaky, moody, up and down, anxious, fearful. But as well as that, one of the things that people have to understand is that at an individual level, people who are highly emotional are experience way more discomfort and pain than people who are low in emotionality. So a really important characteristic, and that's why it has an asterisk. For most jobs, you'd say it's better to be low in emotionality than high in emotionality. Then we move to extroversion, and you see that extroversion doesn't have an asterisk. It's a horses for courses kind of situation. So there are jobs where it's good to be an extrovert, and there are jobs where it's good to be an introvert. If I'm selling things, salespeople tend to be extroverts. Many leaders are extroverts. People who are in jobs that require a lot of social contact can be more comfortable if they're extroverts. But there are also jobs like, for instance, highly analytical tasks, where being an introvert is a very important thing. If you've got somebody who is going to, an IT person who's going to cut code all day, for instance, being an introvert can be a very useful thing indeed. And then we have agreeableness, and agreeableness, in this case, it does get an asterisk, because agreeableness is the degree to which somebody is approachable, easy to get along with, or angry. So under the Hexaco model of personality, the really important thing to understand is that low agreeableness means anger. So it's not just about being nice or not being nice, it's actually anger. So people with low scores in agreeableness will have angry dispositions, and that's important because we know that high anger, i.e. low agreeableness, is a predictor of violent behaviour, even sexually violent behaviour. Low agreeableness or high anger can contribute to that. Conscientiousness also has an asterisk, because conscientiousness is a really good predictor of productivity at work. People who are highly conscientious tend to get through more work. People who are highly conscientious also tend to undertake organisational counterproductive work behaviours. In other words, doing bad things to their organisation. They do that less often if they're high in conscientiousness than people who are low in conscientiousness. And you'll see that there are 4 characteristics to conscientiousness: organisation, which is about making sure that everything's straight and well organised; diligence, which is about being hardworking; perfectionism, which is about being detail-minded; and prudence. Prudence is about being self-controlled and not impulsive. And certainly if you start to combine personality characteristics, you can imagine if somebody's low in agreeableness, which means angry, and then low in prudence, which means lacking self-control, well, you're really dealing with a pressure cooker situation, somebody who may well respond very negatively to pressure situations. And finally, of the key personality characteristics, you have this thing called openness to experience. And openness to experience has these 4 characteristics. Openness to experience is really about how broad-minded I am and to what degree I'm happy to consider different and alternative ways of doing things. Just about everybody on earth is somewhere between being a change junkie and being highly conservative. And so openness to experience is the characteristic of being broad-minded, flexible, prepared to consider new options. And so you see that there are 4 components: aesthetics, which means about how things look. Do I really care about that? Inquisitiveness, am I really interested in new ideas? Creativity, do I want to do new and different things? Unconventionality is the degree to which I'm going to be comfortable with ideas or solutions that sort of seem unfamiliar or weird. And then finally, altruism. Altruism is what we call an interstitial scale. It's not part of this 6, it doesn't fit into the overall 6, but it's something that stands out in its own right. Altruism is the degree to which I want to help people. Not surprisingly, when we psych test people in the not-for-profit or government sectors, we quite often find that they are high in altruism, and that's probably one of the reasons why they go into that type of organisation, because of their belief in the importance of helping people. Now, all of this relates to high-performance modelling, because high-performance modelling is a technique where you're going to take a group of highly performed employees and you're going to evaluate, going back, we're talking about cognitive ability, you'll evaluate their cognitive ability, probably. Sometimes we develop high-performance models that don't involve cognitive ability, particularly if the staff that we're dealing with are relatively junior. But then we're talking about personality. Naturally, certain personalities allow people to succeed in certain jobs. And later on, what I'm going to do is give you an example of a high-performance model. In fact, the example we give you is from the construction sector, but we've developed high-performance models for government, for sales positions, for accounting positions, for not-for-profit organisations, for caregiving roles. It's a phenomenally flexible technique. So, personality, cognitive ability, largely nature, and now we're going to talk about things that are largely nurture, in other words, things that people acquire in the course of their lives. So one of the first things we should talk about is a person's value set. And people use the term values in a range of different ways. But I guess what people really seem not to know that much is that there's extremely good research on the topic of values. And one of the most powerful researchers in the world is a guy by the name of Shalom Schwartz. This is the gentleman that you see on the screen in front of you now. You can see he's Professor Emeritus at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he really is one of the world's leaders in research into values. He regularly surveys in excess of 500,000 people each year, which makes him a pretty powerful researcher. And in the course of his career, he has measured literally millions, tens of millions of people on their value sets. So Schwartz, and he built on the work of a guy by the name of Milton Rockledge, who was really a specialist in measurement of national values. And basically, I won't spend too much time going into this, but it turns out that there are really seven key values that operate at a cultural level. And those of you who have travelled may have noticed these different values playing themselves out in different cultures. So harmony. So you can have cultures that are high on harmony, which is all about being peaceful and being unified with nature. If you're low on harmony, then you don't really care about that. Embeddedness is about being obedient, being socially ordered. So in certain places, people are highly socially ordered, and in other places, they really don't care about fitting in and obeying the kind of people who are in prominent positions in society. It's okay to be more independent. Hierarchy, which is closely related to embeddedness, is to do with being humble with accepting authority. Hierarchy implies, of course, that there are different levels of seniority in society, so you can be more senior, less senior. Some societies are highly hierarchical, others are less so. Mastery, which is about being ambitious and daring, so in some societies it's encouraged to be ambitious and daring, in other societies not so much. Affective autonomy, which is all about pleasure seeking, it means I have a right to pursue my own feelings. Some societies, yeah, they're like that. Others, you're supposed to be more self-denying. Intellectual autonomy, which is about trying to come up with broad-minded ideas or being flexible as to the sorts of things that you might think about or believe in. And what you'll see is that there are some societies that are high in that, some that are low. Egalitarianism, which is about social justice. There are some societies that are highly egalitarian and others that are really quite comfortable with different levels of justice for different levels of society. Schwartz measured so many people that he was able to come up with a map of the world of values. And what he discovered is that here's these 7 characteristics, and if you measure enough people, and we're talking about millions, you actually can map the world of values. And what he discovered is that Muslim Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa tended to be highly embedded and hierarchical. In other words, they're sort of societies where you're really expected to fit in, you're expected to pay honour to prominent people in society, be they figures of religion or social order or whatever, and so an embeddedness. He also found that if you look at hierarchy and mastery, Confucian China in particular, so we're talking about China, Taiwan, particularly Middle China, those people, if you test enough of them, you'll get their results coming out somewhere on balance around hierarchy and mastery. English speakers like us, affective autonomy, it's quite fine for us to pursue fun and mastery. And intellectual autonomy, which is all about freedom of thinking and egalitarianism. Western Europe comes up strongly there. Harmony, Eastern, Central, Baltic Europe, egalitarianism. And one of the things I like is the Latins seem to be right in the middle, so I presume they can swing in various directions. So there's a world of values. But as well as that, Schwartz discovered that there's values apply very effectively at an individual level, and this is what you really should care about from a workplace point of view. Now, a person's individual values will of course be affected by their cultural values. So I'll run you through very briefly the 10 individual values that you see on the screen in front of you. But if you measure the number of extroverts, for instance, in Tokyo and New York, the number of extroverts is pretty much the same in both of those places. And in fact, norms on personality assessments are quite similar in different cultures. But if you've ever met an extrovert in Tokyo and an extrovert in New York, you're going to find that they behave very differently. And of course, the reason that they behave very differently is their values. Now, cultural values do have an impact on individual values. So I mentioned earlier that IQ and personality are heavily genetically determined. Values turn out to be largely learned. So the difference between values and personality, if we measure somebody's personality at age, say, 20 and age 40, you find out that they turn out to be pretty much the same. Values can change markedly over the course of a person's life because they are learned. And I'll start off with the value of security, this one where I'm indicating in the top left-hand corner. Security is really the degree to which I want to be safe, and I want people around me to be safe. Now, that's an individual value, and interestingly, in other research that we've undertaken, we found that this is a good predictor of occupational health and safety behaviour. People who are security conscious tend to be safer employees than people who are low in security. Now, but security actually correlates 0.3 with the person's age in years. So what that means is that as people get older, they get more security conscious. And I guess if you're 25 and you've got no responsibilities in terms of a mortgage, or maybe living at home with mum and dad and you've got an income, well, why would you worry about security? But if you're, say, 35 and you've got, or 40 and you've got dependents and a mortgage and all of those sorts of things, maybe you're going to be a little bit more security conscious. Then we move across to power. The value of power means I want to dominate. And in fact, most of these values, we will say, it's really a horses for courses kind of situation. What values really do is they give a wonderful indication as to whether a person is likely to fit into a particular group. So if my values coincide with the group that I belong to, I feel comfortable and I tend to be accepted. If my values don't, then I tend much more to be uncomfortable and to be rejected. So in most cases, values represent fit, culture match, if you like. But I'm going to make two exceptions, and the first exception I'm going to make is power, because people who are high power seekers, that's a bad thing. It doesn't seem that there's any benefit in hiring people who are power seekers, but it is correlated with domineering behaviour, and it can also be correlated with various forms of counterproductive behaviours like bullying and harassment. Not every time, so we will find people who are high in power who are good to work with, but it's rarer. Achievement is a sense of ambition, and achievement means I want to progress my career, I want to be seen to be successful, I want to get ahead in life. Hedonism is about seeking out pleasurable experiences, and I'm sure if you've worked in different workplaces, pleasure seeking, having fun, getting along with each other in a pleasant interpersonal sense can be seen as being a good thing, and perhaps there are other workplaces where maybe that's not so well regarded. Stimulation is all about the degree to which I want to pursue interests. I want to pursue variety, and a person who's really high on stimulation will be the sort of person who's actually prepared to take risks in order to get that variety. Self-direction, I want to run my own show, I want to make my own decisions, pretty self-explanatory. Universalism is not self-explanatory. Universalism is I want to make the world a better place. And we see a lot of evidence in not-for-profit type organisations that people who come to those sorts of organisations, very often they're high on universalism. And universalism typically means an interest in environmental sustainability or social justice. Benevolence is I want to help people, and I want to help people means I want to be kind to people, I want to be helpful, I want to be ethical. So in certain workplaces it's an important thing, other places maybe not so much. Now, I mentioned that there are two values that I'm going to say are good things or bad things relatively, whereas the other 8 are really about culture match to the right organisation or the right team. Conformity is something where you can say that there are bad scores on conformity. Conformity is the degree to which people accept and believe in rules. So if people are low in conformity, what that means is that they're the sorts of people who will tend to ignore rules, they will tend to regard rules as unimportant, they're quite comfortable about breaking rules. In fact, we found this to be a very good predictor of counterproductive work behaviours. When people are high in conformity, what it means is that they're much less likely to bully, harass, harm, hurt other people or their organisation. So, and the final thing I'd say about conformity, it does surprise people to hear this, but people who are high in conformity can actually be very good interculturally, because conformity means that if I encounter a social group or an ethnic group that has a particular set of rules, rather than simply dismiss them or consider them to be wrong, it's more likely that I'm going to respect them. So conformity is a good thing. Tradition, finally, people who are high in tradition, that means that they accept the dictates of their family or their society or their religion or whatever. So tradition is kind of like a much more extreme version of conformity. Now, the concept of high performance modelling is really to identify people's characteristics on all of these things and to measure them so that you can create a local set of norms. Now, the other thing that we have to, so those are all the things that you can measure with psychological assessment. And sometimes when we do high performance modelling, clients ask us, look, we only want the psych testing bit. But other times what they'll say is that we want psych testing bit, which is the sort of a combination of nature and nurture, IQ, personality being largely nature, values being largely nurture. But other times they'll say, yeah, we want to go the competency aspect of high performance modelling as well. And competencies, I know that there are many, many competency frameworks. We have developed what I think is a simplification of what everybody else says about competencies, and it looks like this. I think that for a competency framework to be meaningful, what you have to do is you have to think of the role in terms of outcomes. What are the outcomes that we need to achieve in order to be considered to be effective in our roles? And so outcomes could be customer satisfaction type outcomes, they could be productivity, getting a certain amount of stuff done, they could be quality outcomes, doing the work to a certain quality standard, they could be about relationships, they could be about whatever. Jobs need to achieve outcomes. There are 3 classes of competencies which seem to matter in terms of being able to achieve outcomes. And these are skills. The skills that a person possesses are, of course, crucial to their ability to be able to deliver outcomes. Experience and qualifications, again, crucial to the achievement of outcomes. And style, attitudes, and values, which are also crucial to the achievement of outcomes. Now, if you get a competency framework that works well enough and it's simple enough, then of course that can be used for recruitment purposes, it can be used for mentoring and guidance and coaching, attraction strategies, workforce planning. I mean, workforce planning really is about creating the workforce that possesses the competencies necessary to deliver whatever outcomes the organisation needs to do now and in the future, training and development, supervision, performance management, and so forth. So we believe that there are a couple of key stages in a valid competency analysis. We also believe that most competency analyses that we've seen in our lives are way too complicated, and that is one of the reasons that many line managers cannot stand the term competency analysis, because they've been given competency frameworks that are weighty, complicated, difficult, and basically not popular. We've worked with clients who have books of competencies, and jobs need to be defined in terms of these competency libraries and so forth. Our approach is much simpler than this. We believe that what really works is to identify 5 to 7 real-world outcomes for each job. And so if you happen to work at SACS, for instance, you don't get a list of duties or anything like that. You just get 5 to 7 real-world outcomes. And so for us, if you're a consultant at SACS, those 5 to 7 real-world outcomes are things like happy colleagues. It may interest you to know that we require our employees to have happy colleagues, and that's assessed through 360-degree feedback each year. Happy clients, so we measure customer satisfaction, and we require people to achieve satisfactory levels of customer satisfaction. Quality standards, and that's assessed through 2 things. One is that we're ISO 9000 accredited, and then there are ratings from the immediate supervisor of that staff member. And finally, commercial outcomes, which is that the staff member needs to bill. And if we think about it, it's a simple way of defining a job, but we find that when people are underperforming or struggling in their jobs, the problem is always in one of those areas. So it's actually a pretty comprehensive way of defining jobs. Outcomes is a great way of defining jobs for a couple of reasons. One is that if people understand the outcomes that they need to achieve, the ratings that they give on job clarity measures, valid job clarity measures, are way higher than when you give them a job description full of tasks. So when we undertake a competency analysis for a high performance modelling purpose or for other purposes, one of the first things we want to do is ask people, what are the outcomes that cause you to be able to conclude that you've done a good job? So we've done, I mentioned earlier, we've done a number of high performance modelling exercises in direct care provision roles. So the measures might be satisfaction of the client, the measures might be things like the degree of compliance with the legislative framework, that it might be the health outcomes for that person. All of those sorts of things are outcomes. The benefit is that once you've got an outcome-based job definition, most people can remember 5 to 7 things, or maybe 4 things, where they really can't remember 50 or 60 duties that are listed on a traditional job description. Now, once you've identified the real-world outcomes for the job, you can imagine we're interviewing people to find out from high performers what their outcomes are. Then you can ask them, what are the skills that you've acquired that help you to achieve these outcomes? And of course, you're going to document all of this. What's the knowledge? What are the experience and qualifications that you've gained that help you to deliver these outcomes? What's the style, attitudes, and values necessary to deliver these real-world outcomes? And so, in effect, what you're doing is that you're going to run an interview protocol, and once you've interviewed however many high performers you have, and in terms of the numbers of high performers, quite commonly we'll deal with 30, but the smallest high performance models we've ever created have been just 5 or 6 people. You can get a valid high performance model out of 5 to 6 people if the characteristics are really clear. And I'm going to show you an example where we used only about 7 or 8 people to develop the high performance model. But for this particular client, it was incredibly valuable because it caused them to be able to accurately recruit a role that they'd had a lot of failures in previously. In other words, they'd recruited wrong people. As soon as they we developed this high performance model for them and they started using it, then what they discovered is that the number of wrong hires fell through the floor and the success rate went through the ceiling. So effective competency analysis in the terms that I'm describing, another pet beef of mine with most competency frameworks is that they tend to be incredibly conceptual, like acts with integrity. I think that competency frameworks should be very behavioural. Tells the truth. I mean, if that's what we mean by acts with integrity, then it's better to put it in behavioural terms. As I say, if you look at competency frameworks across, well, all you have to do is get on Google and Google them. If you look at the way that they're described, same with mission statements, incidentally, they're often couched in such abstract terms that you really can't tell whether a person is complying or not. So if you say to an employee, you must act with integrity, I reckon they will be doubtful as to what you mean in respect of that. Okay, so here is the core concept of high performance modelling. Here's the diagram that explains the idea of high performance modelling. So in order to undertake a high performance modelling task, the first thing that you've got to do is to identify your exemplars, your high performers. And their real world outcomes, or key result areas is another way of putting that, which is what we mean by KRAs. So identification of high performers, really there are two characteristics that high performers need to have. Characteristic number one is that you can't consider people to be a high performer unless they are delivering the outcomes of their job well. They're getting stuff done. All right, so that's crucial. Clearly, if they're in a sales role, they've got to be selling. If they're in a care worker role, they've got to be getting good feedback. If they're an accountant, they've got to be delivering their financial reports on time, accurate, adequate, timely reporting, which is the sort of three keys for financial reporting. And probably they should also have happy customers, so they're delivering their outcomes. The second characteristic, though, of high performance is not just enough for them to deliver their outcomes. They also must be the kind of people that we want to have around here. And what I mean by that is you can put it into HR code and call them cultural exemplars, but people who are behaving the way that we as an organisation think it's important to behave. So a true high performer should be somebody who has those characteristics. Now, if you're looking at high performance modelling, it's important to understand that high performance models can operate at a range of different levels. And what I mean by that is that you can develop a high performance model for an organisation. So you could say, look, our best people generally here are this 40, and so we're going to model them. And what you'll find is that you will get a high performance model out of that 40 people. But you can also take the whole high performance model down to very specific jobs. So where an organisation might have a high performance model overall, then they might have a more tailored high performance model to policy developers, caregivers, salespeople, accountants, and some organisations, in fact, Macquarie Bank is an organisation that's highly committed to high performance modelling, and they have an overall high performance model which says nobody gets in the front door unless they have these characteristics. But then if you're a cash trader, you would be relating to a different high performance model than if you were an equities analyst, let's say. So the level of analysis that you want to bring is important. What we tend to find, the most common high performance modelling tasks that we're asked to undertake would be with organisations where they tend to have either large numbers of particular employees, so they want to get better at that recruitment, or what they're doing is that they're thinking of jobs that are critical to their success. Now, once you've identified your high performers, and clearly what you have to do is to undertake a communication exercise with them. Now, you'll have to be careful about how you communicate this because there's a corporate culture component here. In some organisations, it's perfectly acceptable to say, we are doing an exercise of psych testing and evaluating our best people. In other organisations, let's say organisations that have a very strong commitment to an equity principle, that might be a very difficult thing to say. In other words, you don't say, look, these are our best people, so that everybody else is not our best people. So the way that you can do it that way is really just to say to people, look, we're undertaking an exercise to improve our recruitment process. We've chosen certain people to participate. It's a sample, and you may not go into the fact that these people are high performers. Strictly speaking, of course, if you're going to look at this in a pure research sense, the absolutely best way to do high performance modelling is to get people that you consider to be your high performers, get people who you consider to be your middle performers, and get people who you consider to be your worst performers. And if you assess all of those three levels, of course, the best measures will be ones which differentiate between those three levels. And that is something that works extremely well. We find that clients are rarely comfortable to fund such an exercise, and they end up just testing the high performers and comparing their results against general population or professional population norms. So if these people are way different from population average, then you can validly conclude, okay, well, that's what makes our high performers. So you psych test your high performers, and the psych testing that you use would typically be IQ, personality, values, or a combination of those. So in less senior positions, we often find clients don't test for IQ, but most clients would want to test for personality and values. At the same time, what you'll do with that group is that you will interview them, and you'll interview them about the outcomes that they need to achieve in order to do their jobs well. You'll interview them about the skills that they believe that they have that have helped them to achieve those outcomes. You'll interview them about the knowledge and experience and qualifications that they have that they feel have equipped them to achieve the outcomes of their job. And you'll ask them about their attitudes and their behaviours that they think, the style-related things that they think contribute to their ability to achieve those outcomes. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, I think our biggest high-performance modelling exercise was we tested something like 100 people and interviewed them, and the smallest 5 or 6. And really, the size of the exemplar group will depend on the size of the group that you try to predict. So if you've got 200 people doing something, well, you really should go for a big sample, like 30 to 50, let's say. 30 is fine, 20 will do. If, on the other hand, you're dealing with a small group, and I'm going to show you a high-performance model where there is only about 28 to 30 people in this particular role, we developed a high-performance model based on about 8 of their best, and it worked really well for that small sample, and it was a very successful high-performance model. Now, once you've psych tested people and you've been through the behavioural interviewing process, then what we do for you is that we use the psych tests and the scale scores which pick out the high performers, and so you can differentiate the scores that these people have from Joe average, or if you've tested a lower performing group, what differentiates them from the lower performing group. And then what we do is we build a process based on the psych tests and the behavioural interviews, and typically what we do is that we turn those, what we found in the behavioural interviewing process, into behavioural interviewing questions with a scoring system, and we turn the psych tests into a kind of a pro forma which allows you to assess whether people meet the psych profile that you're looking for to define these high performers. So as I said earlier, pick your exemplars, represent outstanding performance, quality or quantity, or both. So they're good at the what of the job. And they're outstanding corporate citizens, and they are good at the how of the job. Now, the governance structure for choosing a group of exemplars, we suggest that you should use people who work closely with these people and who will be in a position to judge how all of this is working out, whether they're, both of these characteristics. I think that these high-performance modelling exercises work best where people are dealing with individuals that the governance structure is that these are people who know these are people who are going to make the decisions advisedly, because of course the better the group of high performers, the fact that they genuinely are high performers, the more likely it is that this model will work well when you actually implement it later on. So here's a real life example. Now this is a construction company, and so this construction company came to us because they were running into difficulties. They'd hired people in project management roles. So these were people who were building construction projects. And these construction projects could be anywhere from $20 million to $100 million, let's say. Some were smaller, about $10 million. But these project managers were absolutely critical to this organisation. They would literally determine whether a project would make money or lose money, and also a whole range of grief-related factors such as staff turnover, engagement of employees, and so forth. So when we tested, and now this was a group of 8 of their high performers out of a population of about 28 in total, and when we measured their high performers, you see that the average of their verbal reasoning was 48, which means almost exactly population average for these high performers. So what it says is that, yeah, they're just average. But on the other hand, you'll notice that this is actually a standard deviation above and below the average. Look, for those of you who aren't statistical, just regard it as a measure of spread. So you see a big line means a high degree of spread. So not only was there an average mean of these people's characteristics, some people had very high scores, some people had very low scores. So we'd say that doesn't really factor as a high performance modelling question. But when we move to numerical reasoning, you'll see that the average is all of a sudden 60, and the error bar, we call this spread line an error bar, the error bar is a lot tighter. And you see, okay, so we're going to say on balance, most people are above, because the vast majority of that error bar is above population average for numerical reasoning, says that this job relies on numbers. So we set a cohort norm of, let's say, you've got to be 40 or above to be on numerical reasoning to do this job, where we really didn't include a verbal reasoning score, apart from to say that the person just can't be too low on that. But abstract reasoning being a sort of a general problem-solving ability, you see that 69. So, and the error bar hardly touches the average line here. 50 is average for the population. So what it says is that these people, these good project managers, are actually high in abstract reasoning. So they're good at being able to problem solve, they're good at being able to think things through, they're good at being able to identify the implications of the characteristics. So for this organisation, this was a really important learning, because it says all of our high-performing project managers have high abstract reasoning scores. They use that as a cut line in future for recruitment. Then we move to personality. Now, it was really interesting to see the personalities of these project managers, because what this shows you is that the average line once more is 50, and you'll see this is the hexaco model of personality. Honesty, humility, you see a little above population average in honesty, humility. Obviously, no one was low in honesty, humility, so that's worth learning. But look at this very small spread here of emotionality scores, and quite clearly below population average. So what it says is that in order for these project managers to succeed, they have to be a particularly unemotional bunch. They can't be flighty or easily scared. We also found that they were extroverts. This is a job where you tend to have to go out and talk to a lot of people. You have to be quite confident and assertive, and so extroversion turned out to be an important characteristic. Agreeableness, actually a little below average on agreeableness, but with a tight error bar. So these people weren't fluffy pussycats, which would have been a high agreeableness score, and they also weren't angry, but they were sort of somewhere in the middle. Now, it's a tough job, and what that suggests is that maybe you have to be interpersonally confident enough to, well, actually push people on occasions to get things done. And you'll see that the conscientiousness score was very high, so we're talking about an average of maybe 65 or something here, and with the error bar not getting anywhere close to population average. So these people are unusually hardworking and dedicated. Are they broad-minded? Well, some were and some weren't. And are they altruistic? Do they want to help people? Well, some were and some weren't. Now, this is the same thing. This is the hexaco, but what we're talking about is these are the facets which make up the 6 factors. So underneath these 6 factors, there are 4 facets. I won't go through it all, but I will pick out some key characteristics. So 50 is the average. You see that's the 50 line there. And you see, again, some things above average. So people who succeeded tend to be fair-minded people. Okay. Were they sincere? Yeah, neither here nor there. It's above and below. You wouldn't want that to be too low. But look at the emotionality scores here. Anxiety. These are people who are low on anxiety. These are people who are low on dependence, which means that they're prepared to make their own decisions. They're not very sentimental people, so we can't expect them to cry in movies very much or kind of overly empathize with people. And I think that's because it's a tough job. You also see that they're high in social self-esteem and high in social boldness, which says that they're really quite prominent, confident people. And if you've ever had anything to do with the construction industry, you probably know why that would be. Liveliness is all about the degree to which they're chirpy and cheerful and optimistic, and it's good business to be optimistic in. Agreeableness characteristics, you see forgiveness, about population effort, but look how low they are on gentleness. And I guess if you're the sort of construction manager who needs to go out and explain to some subcontractors that they need to deliver a certain thing by a certain time, I suspect it's not that surprising to see this low gentleness score. Here's the hard-working characteristics. They're highly diligent, highly organised, highly perfectionistic, which means detail-minded, and very prudent, which means that they don't make their decisions impulsively. They really are the sorts of people who will think things through. Now, from there, we competency analyse the people, and so I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but what we found is that here are some of the characteristics that we found in a preference interview. We found that project management experience was an experience characteristic that was very important. So commercial or government experience was crucial, so tick, tick, and those were not nice to have, those were you must have those. Then what we did is we looked at some behavioural interview questions, and you see we gave them a rating scale out of 5, and the questions that were there: please describe your ideal next job, what organisational culture do you succeed in, and then we developed a table for the scores that were identified in the psych testing exercise. And you'll see that what we said is that the person really should satisfy 8 out of the 10 of these characteristics. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we often use a cut score of around about 80% when we've developed a high performance model. So people could be considered to have conformed to the high performance model when they have 8 out of 10, if it happens to be 10, or if you're doing about 100 characteristics, you wouldn't, but you're really looking for them to have 80, because you've got to set a cut score somewhere. Now, in this particular case, this organisation adopted this high performance model, and for them it was a big success because they markedly reduced their wrong hires, but they also subsequently markedly increased their success of hiring, and in particular things like speed through their recruitment and training process. So, as I said, we've done it in commerce, we've done it in the not-for-profit sector, we've done it in the government sector, and I think if we look at some key characteristics, so this is the peak of the science of recruitment so far. We don't know a better way of increasing accuracy, and for many of our clients who've undertaken high-performance modelling, they'll come back a year later and say reduction in occupational health and safety risk, reduction in work cover payments, reduction in bullying, harassment, and we quite often get very strong feedback from the trainers who train these people or who supervise them. You know, these are people that are just picking things up more quickly. So you're reducing selection errors, you're maximising success and the speed of learning, and you're developing an agreed process for everyone. Now, the whole purpose of why we write the recruitment kit is because really what we're trying to do is to provide managers with an expert recruitment methodology that they don't need to be trained heavily in. So it's, okay, look at their psychs, do they comply with this? We're talking about behavioural interview questions. These are the questions that you should be asking. Here's what you should be looking for. Score it. And one of the other things that you get that can be really helpful if you've adopted a high performance model is you tend to get much higher levels of agreement from recruitment panels. You may have had the experience of where recruitment panels shall we say, just don't quite agree with each other. You know, two people think that this person's fantastic, the other two think that the person's not so good. High performance modelling tends to give a set of criteria which takes away some of that controversy because it's an agreed methodology that people adopt. So just to conclude, I'm going to say that if you want a copy of these notes, don't hesitate to drop me an email. Only too happy to do that. We get a lot of requests from these webinars where people want to give other people an opportunity to see the webinar, and we have recorded this webinar, so it will be available. And the final thing that I always like to say, may your next hire not be a psychopath. I hope you have a great day.